Hello. So this is really the first draft of hopefully a series of conversations with art books. I haven't prepared anything really. I've plucked a few books from the bookshelves, which were kind of elicited from reading this little publication by Naomi Draper, which I received in the post, and I'm very thankful to her for sharing this with me. Over the last, I'd say, year, even though I've received art publications by artists in the post, in the last year I've received a lot more, and I don't know what this means because I haven't asked for this. I haven't looked for publications by artists to be sent by the post. I haven't reached out at all. So something is happening very naturally among artists that they're making these art publications, whether they're solo monographs or more experimental zine-like publications, which are working with a smaller budget. But there's all this literature out there, all this hardware that artists are using to bring their work to a very small audience. Perhaps they're sick of the digital space, Instagram, which really is starting to look like Etsy now. But I really value these objects that artists make. When I receive them or when I buy art publications by artists, I really covet them. I care for them. And there's something that sometimes can sit on the shelf without being looked at. And then all of a sudden they solicit your attention. It's like the timing becomes right to look through them. And over the last few days, I've been looking through artist publications that have been sent to me by post, and I've really enjoyed it because they are a visual, tactile thing. And I'm going to talk about really a few things that this object contains by Naomi Draper. It contains text. It does contain a catalogue essay by Joanne Laws. And it also contains kind of testimonies by Naomi herself, an artist she's worked with on, I think, a curatorial residency at Roscommon Arts Centre. And Joanne Laws is from Roscommon herself, so there's a real, I wouldn't say parochial, but there's a kind of coming together of different artists, a writer, in this kind of curatorial space under the aegis of a residency, a curatorial residency, which, knowing Naomi's work, as I worked with her at Gorey School of Art as part of a project, a curatorial project there, I know she leans into, and I'm using the word, a word from the title of this publication, as one leans into another, embraces objects in a way that I haven't experienced or witnessed before, in that she cares for them in a way that it's not just this aesthetics of care or theories of care that are very much part and parcel of the literature surrounding art at the moment, this kind of empathy with objects and the world without and within. But in the way she corsets and packages and opens objects, there's a kind of, the object itself becomes a container. And Joanne Laws brings up the word curator as meaning, and maybe perhaps in Latin or something like this, or from Latin cura, which is to care. So I think that was a real pivotal moment in Joanne's text where she brings out the essence of Naomi's practice through this word, curator and care, and the conjoining of those things. This idea, using that word conjoining, and I probably will do this a lot in this series, where word association will become a way in which to navigate the difficulty of talking about this stuff, because it's so abstracted in a way. But what I would say is that this idea of conjoining, the publication itself is kind of conjoined. It's like a palindromic object, in that it's one of those kind of fold out. Sometimes you can get stapleless zines that just fold out. But Naomi has made a fold out zine, but also made 2 zines that bookend each end. So you end up at the front, if it is the front, because they both can be read as the front. But the way I would read it is that Naomi's text is at the foreground, and then Joanne's text is at the back. But you can read it both ways, so it's kind of a palindromic object. There's also, just looking at it now, it's stapled on both ends. There's a kind of this glow of pink on both ends as well. Weirdly, I was reading the new catalogue by Donald Maloney, and he has this palindromic inside leaf also, which is the same image on the front, on the inside cover of the front and the back. It's just coming to mind now. But Joanne's text, let's look at it backwards. Joanne's text, root and all, towards an understanding of objects and their care. And we have this hand, and then we have a different hand on the back, which is kind of, it's more gestural, whereas this seems more passive. And there's probably a nuance here that I'm not reading at the very beginning. But root and all, it really, I think about the much used Deleuze and Guattari rhizomatic theories, especially roots and this kind of lateral and hyperlinked space where things connect, not in a hierarchical way, but in a kind of a way that flattens hierarchies. And you get this from the book as a whole. There's a flattening of hierarchies, because reading through, especially Naomi's testimonies and conversations, it's a kind of curatorial text where she's worked with different artists, and I'm not going to name them all, but there's lots. There's 5, 6, 7 artists that she's worked with during this 3-year span of this curatorial residency. And there's a kind of simpatico among the artists in how they look at objects. And I won't mention the names because I'm going to, of course, forget some of the names, or I won't mention them. But there's a kind of proximity towards objects, a closeness to objects, an intimacy with objects. And it's fascinating because these words, these subheadings within the testimonies: trust, a brown fur coat, where there's this kind of sense of desire for fur, but also, as Naomi says, I detest real fur, but there's a kind of seduction around these objects. you see how I've written some Marginella, Tristan Garcia, Black Slate. I'll get back to that in a minute. But looking through the texts, I really enjoyed this text actually, because it goes back and forth in correspondence with other artists who have the same sensibility, maybe, in a way. Some of the names are popping up here: Anna Spearman, Marion Balfe, Laura Fitzgerald, Miriam O'Connor, Barbara Knevzik. There's lots of artists here: Celine Sheridan, Jane Fogarty, Mary Hensey. I said I wouldn't do this, but of course I am doing it now, but I'm going to miss someone. But anyway, COVID-19 pops up as well. And this is a COVID-19 publication. And I don't say that in a derogatory way. It is a moment in time. And this project seemed to span that time where people were separated, were isolated. And the idea of touch became very important to the sensibilities. And there is a kind of, when you see all the text here, especially front and back, there is an aspiration here to kind of figure out feelings and even aesthetics through writing, through text, even though there's also an emphasis on touch. And when I'm flicking through this, the sense of touch is palpable. What I would say is that there's no names of artworks in it. And I want to go to that section of the artworks, because the artworks aren't explicit in a sense. They're kind of tucked in to the cover. And you find them in, of course, Joanne's text. And here's some of the, if I can show you to. The staple actually starts to indent the opposite page, which is kind of beautiful when you think of the indentations in the objects and these kind of vessels, because they feel like vessels rather than objects. They hold something within them, which brings me two things, and these are just coming up as I think about them. So there's a quote here in Joanne's text by Elena Filipovich. Artists' curated initiatives raise questions regarding the limits of an artwork. Where does an artwork end and its contents begin? And there's another quote in here, and it's a reference really more than a quote. It's both. But Naomi brought up Wittgenstein's Tractatus Logico Philosophicus. I've always called it the Tractatus. And she mentions that it came up in a conversation with Mick O'Hara. And Wittgenstein and the Tractatus has been something very important to me as both an artist and a critic. And I dug out my copy. Put this aside for a minute. This is my copy from the early 2000s. And I was reading this on the 46A bus to Dunleary. When I was an art student there. It was probably my second year, and I don't know who mentioned this to me, but it became really important to me. I kind of read it in one go. The buses used to take forever, but it's a pleasure to read, but I was very interested in objects, and I actually continued reading Wittgenstein when I did my MFA at NCAD. But it was really weird going back over this. And I wrote in the beginning, and here it is. This is over probably 23 years old, this note. Relation equals words plus things. And then towards the back. So, this is about things, not isolated, not independent, but dependent on other things within infinite space for meaning. Reading back on this is so strange because, I have dog-eared it in places. I've wrote lots of notes, especially at the very beginning of this thing. But that was interesting. So going back to Naomi's use of the Tractatus, if I can find it. Where are we? In order to know an object, I must know not its external, but all the internal qualities. And that's what I get from Naomi's work, in that there's a kind of unpacking of stuff, an internalization. Some ways I feel it's like an embodiment, or making these objects into vessels, kind of human vessels that you unpack, like a surgery. Sometimes I get very visceral in my descriptions of things, but a cutting open of the body, a rifling through, but carefully, tentatively, but kind of a joy in that. And these objects don't become just surface level objects, but they become more than that. They become the contents that they contain, more than the surfaces. So there's an unlacing, there's a lacing back, there's a kind of search for something that the object holds within itself, rather than this surface level appreciation of art, this kind of illusionism on the flat surface. That there's something about the inside of things that is very central to how Naomi makes and unmakes her work, in the unpacking of it and the presentation of it. The seeds of a plant, how they are within something. This idea of reproduction, this idea of what's growing inside. There's something about that is very visceral and very, I don't know, the words aren't there at the moment. But also, I was thinking about vessels, and this is a book, one of the many books I have of Matthew Barney. They're beautiful things. I suppose he has so much money behind him that he can produce these things, and if you get your hands on one, they're beautiful. But some of the images in Naomi's work remind me of his work. I hope you can see it here. It's and this book itself is called Subliming Vessel, the drawings of Matthew Barney. But these are drawings, but they're contained within these vessels, which have a kind of organic, but also there's something about early childhood in these, the caring of a child, and all the soft-edged objects that surround you when you have a young child. And there's something embryonic, or something about holding something within the softness of objecthood. And they're so delicate. The drawings themselves are so delicate, but then there's the repetition as well. There's this kind of tartan rug behind this. Of course, this is one of the tropes of Barney's work from the Crime Master series. And then there's the staining, and there's all this kind of... It also reminds me of Mary Kelly's work, postpartum work, where she used nappies and onesies and all that kind of stuff from early childhood. There's also a kind of toilet aesthetic here as well. So this book by Tristan Garcia, Form and Object, A Treatise on Things, is from the whole speculative realism, object-oriented ontology movement or group of writers. But Garcia, unlike Harman, who was one of the main protagonists of the group, is a beautiful poetic writer. He writes novels also. But there's an extract from his introduction that I always go back to, and it reminds me when I was reading Naomi Draper's testimonies around her curatorial correspondences and experience around objects and things, and this kind of internalization of this kind of internalized aesthetic, this containing of feelings, interconnected with spaces and objects. I went back to Garcia and this extract, and I might read some of it out, just to get a sense of it, and maybe as a way to connect my thinking around Naomi Draper's work, but also this idea of the curator. I've been reading again Bruno Latour's actor network theories, and I really feel that the curator is very much an actor network theorist within the art world, because unlike the artist who, generally speaking, focuses on making the physical object and is very connected with form, the curator is much more about connecting things in a network, whether they're human or non-human objects, artists and artworks, and they're kind of a collaborative entity, but they're working behind the scenes, connecting all these threads. But this extract by Tristan Garcia has always stayed with me. It's just a beautiful piece of prose, but also it talks about objects in the world. And I think the organic nature of the object that he describes, a black slate, broken off from a continental shelf, is really in keeping with a lot of the object-oriented aesthetic of artists in Ireland. I've witnessed a lot, where they're, I think of someone like Caoimhe Kilfeather, Niamh O'Malley. There's a kind of poetic insistence in their work in relation to materiality And I think this really hones in on that. So, this is Tristan Garcia. Take, for example, a block of black slate, a random rectangular sample taken from a site of continental collision. Few people will deny that this block is a thing. One can, of course, point out that it is necessary to have an active subjectivity to divide or distinguish this block of matter lying on the ground of dusty soil in order to perceive it as such. But this slice of black slate possesses certain qualities of cohesion and of solidity that allow one to dissociate it from its environment, handle it, transport it, and consider it quite simply as something. What is it composed of? It contains quartz, clay-like minerals, mica, some traces of feldspar, and all these components themselves have a certain atomic structure, but in a wider sense, they also enter into the constitution of the rock as thing, its rectangular form, the irregularities of its surface, the porphyroblasts coated with pyrite, its somber colour, its delicate texture, its weight, its fragility, and all the primary and secondary qualities by which we can recognize the black slate. So that's one thing. So going back to Naomi's publication, I'm going to go back to a quote from Joanne Laws by Elena Filipovich. Artist-curated initiatives raise questions regarding the limits of an artwork. Where does an artwork end and its contents begin? In some ways, when I look at Naomi's work, I think of not a curator but an artist. And even though this was made on the back of a curatorial residency where Naomi had the opportunity to work with other artists in a curatorial role, there's something more artistic about its mode of production. As someone who's been in the presence of Naomi installing her own work, there's a different type of care taking place, something that is infectious in a way, because I witnessed her before unpacking some of her work at Gorey School of Art, and I smiled when she was doing it because you could see the pleasure, the anticipation of unwrapping this thing that had been corseted up a little bit. And there was something about revealing what was inside rather than depending on the surface of an object and a thing. Its internal qualities, what is inside, is important, that cliche. We don't get to do that much with art objects. They are untouchable things. They're too precious to handle. And in Naomi's world, there's a sense that what is inside is more important. What is behind the screen, what is behind the painted surface. And in a way, that's what I'm trying to do actually here in this studio with a lot of the stuff I've been doing, is trying to unpack things that are beneath the surface. It's always really difficult because there's so many disguises and roles that artists take, and you never know what's behind the curtain in a way. But objects like this really allow you in. They in a way, one of my criticisms of publications in general is that hiring an artist or a writer to write on your work, I think that's a very old convention. And it doesn't bring us closer to the work, in my experience. I usually disregard the catalogue essay. I really don't engage with them myself, only at moments that I feel I can give something, that I've had a relationship with the artist or something, that there's something going on behind the scenes. And you do get this from Joanne's text. I'm not criticizing Joanne's text, but in a way, I'm criticizing the convention of catalogue essays, just for the sake of getting, whether it's a very visible writer or even a friend to write on your work. And I think there's just something there excessive and too obligatory to get a writer to write on your work. What is really enriching in this publication are the testimonies at the beginning. Between Naomi in the presence of other artists and the discussions that are shared and confessed in this about objects and things in the world, there's a lot of collaboration. I'm always really amazed how artists in Ireland know each other and they actually work with each other behind the scenes, but you don't get that in their shows. That kind of that internal world is never revealed, and here it is. So this object is kind of, once again, it's in keeping with Naomi's perspective on this kind of in the object, like going back to the Tractatus by Wittgenstein. In order to know an object, I must know not its external, but all the internal qualities. It goes back to Tristan Garcia's atomization of a block of slate. And after reading this, I can get closer, actually, and I get to know that the art scene is less surface and more about the internal qualities behind the objects that artists produce. There's something that Naomi remarks on in this. I don't know where it is within the publication, but she talks about Instagram, and she talks about the hashtag, the WIP, WIP, work in progress, that artists really started to disseminate during COVID, where they show themselves in their studios. I actually think I did it as well at one point. There was a real desperation to reach out beyond the confines of the domestic or the studio at that time. And she talks a little bit about that, but really that access into the privacy of the artist's work is not what I'm talking about in terms of images or Instagram. I think that feels always performative, whereas this feels a little bit vulnerable. When we confess things in words, as I'm doing here, without any script, there's a risk attached. There's a lack of fluency in transposing your feelings, especially around an art object like this. And in a way, this has, for me, succeeded in doing that, because it's brought up so many ideas around artists making objects in the world, and outside of the trope of exhibiting your work in a white cube. And I always feel that artists are missing out in terms of thinking beyond the gallery, because it's such an exclusive space for artists that not many artists get to visit, never mind install or display their work within. So I think that artists in general should jettison. I think Naomi uses that word in here because I'm reusing it again. Jettison the catalogue essay. And they should just reveal a little bit about themselves and their thinking around objects, even if it's awkward. It doesn't always have to be ironical, defensive. It can be just open. And that's what I get from this. So listen, I rambled on here. I hope I got closer to this object. I feel I have, and I probably will do more of these. This was a test run, and I just thank Naomi Draper for sending this to me, and I also thank the other artists that I've received publications from over the last 6 months. I really appreciate it, even though I may not reach out afterwards. I do covet these things, and I do look at them. They don't just sit on the bookshelf forever. I do pull them out every now and then. Goodbye.